There is a strange thing most people do with retirement. We talk about it like it belongs to us, but we feel it like it belongs to somebody else. You can see it in a tiny, ordinary moment. A person opens their banking app on a Thursday night. Rent is handled. Groceries are more expensive than they expected. A friend wants dinner this weekend. Their 401(n) contribution is sitting there in the payroll portal, quietly asking for another 1%. And in that moment, the future version of them, the one who will need that money, does not feel like a real person. He feels like a polite stranger with the same name. So the person makes the trade that feels human. They protect this week. They keep the extra room in the paycheck. They tell themselves they will increase it later. When things calm down, when the raise comes, when life feels less noisy, nothing dramatic happens. No villain appears. The decision is almost invisible. But this video is about why that invisible decision is so powerful. Not because people are lazy, not because they do not know retirement matters, because two different bugs are sitting inside the same choice. One bug makes the future feel emotionally distant. The other makes compound growth feel mathematically unreal. Together, they can make $1 today feel more alive than hundreds of dollars decades from now. The uncomfortable part is that the research puts a price on this. In a National Bureau of Economic Research summary of work by Gopi Shah Goda, Matthew Levy, Colin Manchester, Aaron Sojourner, and Joshua Tassoff, stronger present bias, or stronger exponential growth bias, was associated with about $26,000 in retirement savings, roughly 20% relative to the mean in their sample. That number is not a promise. It is not a calculator result for your exact life, but it is a signal. The trap is not just that we save too little. The trap is that the person who needs the money later often loses the negotiation before we even realize a negotiation happened. The first bug has a formal name, present bias. The simple version is that we overweight what is close and underweight what is far away. But that definition sounds too clean. In real life, present bias does not feel like a theory. It feels like a body. The bill this month has weight. The birthday dinner has a table, a time, a group chat. The car repair has a noise you can hear. The future expense does not. Retirement is not knocking on the door tonight. It is not sending a late notice. It is not standing in the kitchen while you decide what to cut. This is why guilt is such a weak tool. Telling someone to care about the future is easy. Making the future feel close is harder. The present has smells, deadlines, faces, embarrassment, small pleasures, and immediate relief. The future has a spreadsheet and a vague old person. We hope we'll be okay. In the NBR summary, the researchers describe present bias as a tendency to change your mind as a reward gets closer. You might say 6 months in advance that you will invest a tax refund. Then the refund arrives, and suddenly the earlier plan does not feel like the plan anymore. Nothing about the math changed, the distance changed. That is the dangerous part. We often imagine that our future self will be more disciplined, more organized, less tired, and somehow richer. But future you inherits the results of what present you automates, postpones, and normalizes. If every month says later, later eventually becomes a biography. The money code version is blunt. Retirement planning is not only a money problem, it is an identity problem. You are being asked to protect a person you do not fully experience as yourself yet. The second bug is quieter and maybe more expensive. It is called exponential growth bias. That means people tend to underestimate how things grow when growth compounds on itself. Ladder growth is easy to feel. $10, then 20, then 30. A staircase, one step after another. Exponential growth is harder. It is slow enough at the beginning to look boring, then suddenly steep enough to look impossible. That shape is everywhere in finance. Interest, investment growth, debt, inflation, fees. But the human brain is not naturally good at feeling the curve. This matters because retirement saving is mostly a curve. A contribution today is not only the dollars you put in, it is also the time those dollars get to sit inside the machine. When you underestimate the machine, early dollars look smaller than they are. Waiting looks cheaper than it is. The NBR summary says less than 1/4 of respondents correctly perceived account balances as growing exponentially over time. About 7 in 10 perceived the rate of return on saving to be less than it really is. That is not a tiny misunderstanding. That is the core shape of the game being misread. And again, this is not stupidity. Exponential curves are emotionally weird. A contribution at 27 and a contribution at 47 can be the same amount of money leaving your paycheck. But they are not the same object in time. One has decades to recruit other dollars. The other has to work much harder. So present bias says, keep the money now. Exponential growth bias says, waiting is probably not that costly. One bug pulls the dollar toward today. The other hides the price of that pull. Here is the part that makes this more than a nice metaphor. The NBR article summarizes a working paper called The Role of Time Preferences and Exponential Growth Bias in Retirement Saving. The authors use data from the RAND American Life Panel and the Understanding America study. They measure present bias with choices across time, and they measure exponential growth bias by asking people to estimate what investments become after time and interest. They find that the two biases are common. Over half of respondents show present biased preferences. Less than a quarter correctly perceive exponential account growth. And the biases are weakly correlated, which means they are not just the same flaw wearing two names. A person can be pulled strongly toward today and also misread compounding. Or they can have one bug without the other. Then the researchers connect the biases to retirement balances. After controlling for income, education, risk preference, financial literacy, IQ, and other characteristics, both biases are strongly related to retirement account balances. The headline result is the one the topic came from. A 2 standard deviation increase in either bias is associated with about $26,000 less in retirement savings, or about 20% relative to a mean value of $133,000. The careful wording matters. This does not mean you can watch one video and manufacture exactly $26,000. It means the psychological distance between now and later is not harmless. It shows up in actual balances. The same summary says eliminating both biases from the sample would be associated with a 12% increase in retirement savings. That is not a motivational poster. That is a design problem. This is why so much retirement advice sounds right and still does not move people. Start early. Save more. Increase your contribution. Do not leave the match on the table. Let compounding work. All of that can be true. But advice often assumes the future self is already emotionally present in the room. It assumes the person can look at the paycheck, feel the long-term curve, and calmly choose the abstract winner. Most months are not like that. Most months are a courtroom where the present has witnesses and the future has a chart. The present brings rent, gas, groceries, childcare repairs, loneliness, social pressure, and the small reward that makes a hard week feel survivable. The future brings a number that may or may not feel believable. So the future loses in tiny trials. Not one catastrophic trial, 100 boring ones. You do not enroll this month. You enroll but leave the contribution low. You stop the automatic increase because the raise already got eaten by prices. You cash out a small old account because it feels too small to matter. You promise to fix it next quarter. The tragedy is that each decision can be understandable by itself. A person might genuinely need the cash flow. A person might be choosing between retirement and a medical bill, or rent, or paying down expensive debt. This film is not here to shame that. The point is different. If the future only wins when you feel inspired, it will lose too often. A good system cannot depend on every Thursday night being your wisest night. It has to protect the future on ordinary nights. This is where the story gets less dramatic and more useful. The strongest answer to these biases is not usually a better speech. It is better architecture. A default is architecture. Automatic enrollment is architecture. Automatic annual increases are architecture. A calendar reminder before open enrollment is architecture. A rule that raises contributions when income rises is architecture. These things matter because they stop asking the exhausted present self to rewind the same argument every month. Vanguard's retirement research gives a practical version of this. In its 2025 How America Saves summary, Vanguard says plan design helped drive participation rates to all-time highs in 2024. It also says 67% of participants were invested in professionally managed allocations at year-end 2024. That does not mean everything is solved. Vanguard also noted modest increases in hardship withdrawals, which is a reminder that households are juggling short-term pressure and long-term saving at the same time. But the direction is important. Better plan design does not make people morally superior. It changes the path of least resistance. Another Vanguard piece on automatic increases says participants in plans with automatic enrollment and automatic annual increases save, on average, 20 to 30% more after 3 years than participants in automatic enrollment plans without automatic increases. Again, that is not magic. It is a simple design insight. If the contribution rises with time, the future self stops having to beg for attention. The lesson is not that every viewer should copy one exact number. The lesson is that willpower is the wrong product. The product is a default your tired self can survive. There is another piece of evidence that shows how fragile these choices can be. A separate NBR summary describes a field experiment where employees at a large technology company received emails about changing their 401 NQ. Some emails included tiny cues, an example percentage, a savings goal, or a threshold. These were not giant interventions. They were small pieces of language inside an ordinary benefits communication. The results were surprisingly large. In the first 4 months, a low 1% anchor decreased contribution rates relative to the control by as much as 1.4 percentage points of income within a pay period. In the longer run, that low anchor continued to depress contribution rates by up to 1.2 percentage points. Higher anchors later increased contributions by up to 1.9 percentage points. A higher $11,000 goal raised contribution rates by 2.2 percentage points 10 weeks after the email. The authors are careful. They do not claim they can prove the exact psychological channel beyond all doubt. But their central message is hard to ignore. Small cues can have large effects on savings choices. That should make us more humble. If a tiny example number inside an email can move saving behavior, then maybe undersaving is not always a deep personal failure. Sometimes it is a person interacting with defaults, anchors, forms, friction, and timing. A 1% suggestion can become a floor. Or it can become a ceiling. A match threshold can become a goal, even when the actual retirement need may be higher. The form is never just a form. It is part of the financial environment. Now put the retirement bug inside a real household, not an ideal spreadsheet. The Federal Reserve's 2024 Household Well-Being Report, published in May 2025, says 63% of adults would cover a hypothetical $400 emergency expense completely using cash or its equivalent. That means a large minority would need another method or could not cover it right now. The same report says 55% had emergency savings for 3 months of expenses, while 30% could not cover 3 months by any means. This matters because retirement is not competing against nothing. It is competing against the broken alternator, the rent increase, the dentist, the child who needs shoes, the student loan portal, the credit card balance, and the feeling that the whole month is already spoken for. So the honest film cannot say, just care more about 70-year-old you. That is too easy. Present. You may be dealing with real constraints. In some months, the correct answer may be stabilizing the present before raising the future contribution. In other months, The present self is simply bad at feeling what time is worth. The hard part is telling those apart. That is why I do not like retirement advice that treats every missed contribution as a character flaw. It misses the real question. Is the person undersaving because there is genuinely no room, or because the room exists but the future does not feel real enough to claim it? Those are different problems. They need different designs. There is a counter-argument we need to keep in the film, because otherwise this becomes too neat to Pell's help. Automatic enrollment helps. Auto-increases help. But they do not erase the whole problem. The NBR bias summary ends with a caution. Defaults in retirement income projections have improved decisions in many contexts, but there is no evidence that they fully counteract exponential growth bias and present bias. That sentence matters. It prevents the easy version of the story, where we pretend one setting in a benefits, portal fixes, human time perception, there are also trade-offs. A 2024 NBR reporter discussion of automatic enrollment research describes evidence that, in some contexts, increased pension contributions can crowd out other parts of the household balance sheet. In one UK analysis, each month of exposure to automatic enrollment over the first 3.5 years increased pension contributions by 32 to 38 pounds and unsecured debt by 7 pounds, and 18 to 22% crowd out of new retirement savings. That does not mean automatic enrollment is bad. It means households are systems. If you push money into one bucket while the rest of the household has no slack, the pressure may show up somewhere else. So the mature claim is not automate everything and stop thinking. The mature claim is automate what you can, but watch the whole household. Retirement saving should not be a heroic act that quietly breaks the emergency system. It should be part of a design where present you and future you are not enemies. Here is the rule I would actually use. Make future you concrete before you ask present you for money, not motivational. Concrete. Put the retirement contribution on the same calendar as rent, insurance, and the car payment. Give it a date. Give it a reason. If your plan allows automatic annual increases, decide once whether the increase should happen after raises, not during a random stressful week. If your employer match is part of the picture, do not let the match become the ceiling by accident. Treat it as one input, not the finish line. Then separate two questions that people usually mix together. Question 1. What is the minimum contribution I can keep even in an ordinary bad month? Question 2. What rule raises it when the household has more room? The first question protects continuity. The second protects growth. If you only ask the growth question, the plan breaks during stress. If you only ask the minimum question, the plan can stay too small forever. This is not individualized financial advice. It is decision architecture. The goal is to stop renegotiating your entire future every pay period. You can also fight exponential growth bias with visuals, not lectures. Run a calculator with conservative assumptions. Print the curve. Put the early years and late years on the same page. The point is not to worship a forecast. Forecasts are uncertain. The point is to make the shape visible enough that waiting no longer feels free. Future you does not need a fantasy. Future you needs a recurring appointment, a default, and a curve that present you can actually see. When you are tempted to lower, pause, or ignore retirement saving, use 3 filters. Not because 3 questions solve retirement, because under pressure, 3 is about as many as a human can honestly use. First, is this a real cash flow constraint or a feeling constraint? A real constraint is rent, food, medicine, transportation, safety, high interest debt, or an emergency. A feeling constraint is discomfort, impatience, lifestyle drift, or the sense that the contribution is annoying but survivable. Do not shame the real constraint. Do not let the feeling constraint disguise itself as one. Second, if I change the contribution, what is the restart trigger? A date, a raise, a debt paid off, a bill ending, a tax refund, a new job. If there is no restart trigger, the pause is not a pause. It is a quiet new default. Third, what would make this decision easier next time? Maybe an automatic increase. Maybe a separate emergency buffer. Maybe choosing a default investment. Maybe asking HR one specific question. Maybe moving the decision away from Thursday night when the whole week is already in your nervous system. These filters are not glamorous. That is why I like them. They treat the viewer like a person with limits, not like a motivational machine. The future self does not need you to be perfect. The future self needs fewer decisions to depend on perfect timing. The strange thing about retirement is that it turns a simple fact into an emotional puzzle. The person at the end of the timeline is you. Same name, same body, just changed by time. Same need for dignity, safety, choice, and ordinary peace. But your brain does not automatically feel that. It feels the present first. It feels the visible bill before the invisible curve. It feels the dinner this weekend before the grocery budget 30 years from now. It feels $1 today as real, and $1 compounded for decades as a theory. That is not a moral failure. It is the operating system. And once you see the operating system, you can stop using shame as the main interface. The best retirement plan is not the one that requires you to become a different species. It is the one that admits what kind of creature you are. Present biased, bad at exponential curves, easily moved by defaults, sensitive to anchors, tired on normal weeks, capable of caring deeply when the future is made visible. So, the question is not, why are people so irrational about retirement? The better question is, what would help the future feel close enough to protect? Maybe it is a default. Maybe it is an automatic increase. Maybe it is a calendar. Maybe it is a small emergency buffer that keeps the retirement plan from being raided every time life sneezes. Maybe it is simply honest sentence. The future is not another person. It is you with fewer paychecks. And the earlier you make that person real, the less they have to beg for your attention later.